Okay, so now I can get started. I can find out where I'm at. Yeah, so in that I just gave you, which I thought I had already given you, sorry. We had just gotten into this discussion of the mysterious passage, that we read last time about the proper ratio of, magistrates to the sovereign and so forth. And what it boiled down to was he's launching into his discussion of the three types of government, monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And he wants to point out that the larger the country, the more centralized the government has to be, and therefore the fewer people are actually in charge and the more bureaucracy you have to have, okay, to use more modern language. So you have more intermediaries, for instance, in aristocracy, you have even more in monarchy, because you have fewer people. And so, again, he's kind of having a conversation with Hobbes maybe here, because remember, Hobbes also says there are three forms of government. He's going to discuss the government of the one, the few, and the many. But which did he prefer? The one, right? Because it's the simplest, it's the most likely to create this harmony between the people and the sovereign, because the sovereign should have nothing but the people's interests at heart. I think that Rousseau, understands the flaw in this is that the human being in charge in the particular position may or may not have the people's interests at heart, even if he should. Okay, so you can get that in this book 3, that there's a difference between the ideal situation and reality, and in a lot of cases in reality the monarchy is not perfectly interested in the people's interests or listening to them and hearing what they have to say, but nevertheless it can be good. So let's look at and discuss the 3 different types that he covers. And then he also covers mixed government. Actually agrees with Hobbes on this. Mixed government is far from ideal. So first let's talk about democracy. He says it's suited to small states. Okay, can you understand why? Why can you have a democracy in a small state, but Rousseau says you can't have it when a country gets bigger?
Because you just can't have that many people getting along, and there's going to be inevitable disagreement, and the factions will arise. But hegemony, you're not going to have the same kind of hegemony you can have in this group.
Right. You're not going to have this unanimity that he wants, homogeneity, right? And it's going to get unwieldy, right, for people to meet. Now, obviously, he's talking about that ancient direct democracy, right, and not what we, loosely call democracy, which is really Republican government or representative government. So he's really saying here, if you don't have a city-state, basically a pretty small state, where people can meet very frequently and where you have that homogeneity and everybody can more or less know and hear from each other, then democracy isn't really possible. And when you try to have democracy in a larger state, what you get is you really get a sort of representation in a way, because certain people start standing out. And even in small democracies, this is a danger that is constantly there. He actually says at the beginning of the chapter on democracy that there is no such thing as pure democracy. Okay? He says, that's in the 3rd paragraph down, he says, taking the term in the strict sense, a true democracy has never existed and never will, because in order for there to be an absolute true democracy, people would have to be meeting all the time, and no one or few individuals would stand out. And we know even in Athenian democracy, you had these rhetoricians appear, right, who were really more in charge than the masses, because people seem to look towards leadership of some kind.
About it, even in group projects here at school, you see that happening, where we can't have a direct democracy with 6 people.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's true. I had Robert Faulkner he's an engineering student. He tutored my son for several years, and so I got to learn about a lot of engineering, teamwork stuff that they do. And that was his constant complaint. Yeah, right. He usually had to do all of it if he wanted to get a good grade, and he felt really resentful of it. So I don't know. I don't do team projects, but political science, is it fairly big on that? Do you guys do that?
I mean, I've only had to do a couple, and it kind of turned out like that, where nobody got in touch with me, and I had to contact the professor because nobody was getting back with me on stuff. And like the night before, we were supposed to like do a huge presentation, and
oh God,
I had done over half of the project by myself, and basically they all finally showed up and were just like, all right, let's get this done. I'm like, I've been working on this for like a week now. The rest of this is on you all, because I'm not.
Yeah, it's in a way.
Bigger groups, that worked.
You like bigger groups?
The one we can pick them.
Yeah.
Picking.
But
It's a lot easier picking groups, because then you can tell who's gonna actually do it.
So yeah, teamwork can be. Maybe it's a little bit of a myth in a way, like Rousseau says. It can never exist. We tell ourselves it's good, we should learn how to do it, but then in reality, either that happens where nobody really ultimately you took responsibility for the project in a way, but you didn't take responsibility for trying to herd everybody else, because you probably thought that wasn't your job.
We got back to
okay, you tried.
and texting and.
A lot of times people won't even do that. They'll say, okay, I'll just do it, because it's just too hard to, herd all these other people in the right direction. And if you do, you often find out that you still can't get a lot out of certain people. And it creates this cynicism. But yet, I know in engineering, they work on teams on the job. But of course, since you're getting paid and you can get fired, maybe then people take it more seriously. Okay.
My boyfriend's an engineer, and he's always having group projects, like at least one a week, basically per class.
That's tough.
And it's almost always like that there will always be a couple people that just don't do anything.
It's almost more about leadership at that point than it is about engineering. And I know that they do have to do this on the job, so they really do need to learn it. But I wonder if it's meant that way when they assign these projects, because you could potentially have a better solution having some classes emphasize teamwork that are about leadership and other classes that emphasize learning about engineering. I don't know. So anyway, Rousseau seems to understand these dynamics pretty well. I think the thing that confuses readers sometimes is he's always going back and forth between his ideal and reality, quite fluidly. And sometimes you don't always notice when he's made that transition. But ideally, democracy is best. In a totally abstract, ideal sense, if you can have a small group of people get together and they're all deliberating and they're all cooperating and they all are really of one mind about their goals and so forth, it would work. It would work really well. But yet he understands how rare that is, and this is why he says there's all these things that need to take place. The size of the state needs to be small. He says there needs to be a simplicity of mores, which means that we need not only to be in agreement about our goals and our values, but they need to be very simple, basic, well understood, and that makes it easier to agree. The more complex or the more dimensions you have, which comes with more diversity in a country, the less likely that you can stay simple and in agreement. There has to be a high degree of real equality, of economic equality, and I would say probably also of intellectual equality, right? Because you can't have, again, if you have some people that are standing out way ahead of others, they're naturally going to take the lead, and that ruins the perfection of it. Why does he say there should be no luxury? What is it about luxury here in a democracy that would make it run afoul of itself and be less democratic?
I feel like that's going to kind of go back to his original argument that luxury is the thing that started inequality to begin with, is that, say some person goes out and, gets a really, really nice house and decides to spend all their money on a really nice house, while this other person goes and spends it on just, other things. And I guess, the differences in luxuries, like, that other person would envy this person would envy this person who just...
Okay. Even if all were basically equal economically. Yeah, because people's tastes are different and so forth.
The competition, or the comparison, the comparison aspect of that. So even if, like, you and I were both billionaires, I like red and I couldn't get the red car, I have blue car, so now I want your red car.
And the more money you have, or the more resources you have, the more your natural talents can come out. Let's say that you and I are both billionaires, but you have way more aesthetic sense than I do. And so my house looks like a big concrete, multi-story building, and yours looks like a palace. There's no way we can really erase that difference. But if we live very simple, rustic lives, then those differences just don't come out nearly as much. And also, with luxury comes a diversion of your attention, okay? So if Rousseau wants people constantly engaged in citizenship and in democracy, the more that we have to, to enjoy basically outside of that interaction, then the more our attention is going to be diverted to that. I'm going to have music, I'm going to have great food, I'm going to have, fancy clothes, I'm going to have a great place to live. Well, citizenship becomes something that I have to do, but I'd really rather not be doing, which is kind of where we're at in this country. Oh God, it's time to vote. I've got to make time in my day to get out and vote, but I'm thinking about my job. I'm thinking about, what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, or where I'm going to go out to eat. I'm thinking about what I can add to my wardrobe, or whatever it is. I'm thinking about a lot of other things, my relationships with other people, which I should have mentioned first, right? But notice I didn't, because we're materialistic, right? Or we tend to be. And our type of regime brings that materialism out in us and makes us think about, what am I going to buy next, So in all of this thinking, citizenship shrinks into the background, and it becomes a duty rather than, we might say, a privilege or an honor or something like that. And I think what Rousseau wants is, ideally, this is the best part of your life, is to be in this situation where you can interact and you can, be in that community and really participate, okay? In a way, he gets back to Aristotle's ideal of citizenship here, sort of reminiscent of that, where the highest good and the greatest pleasure and the greatest honor comes from, in his case, in Aristotle's case, taking the lead in a participatory democracy. Okay, so the question, would Rousseau call America democracy? Maybe we've already answered that in a way.
He would like our solid but low foundation, I think.
Yeah, maybe because it's simple.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's low in the sense of self-interest.
Right.
So it's simple, but
the wrong kind.
Because it separates us, the self-interested part separates us. So yes and no. He might have liked the Puritan morals of long ago, when the country was founded, maybe because they were similar to the Calvinistic values in Geneva. There's a lot of overlap there, actually.
Should he more favor, like, I don't know if you guys know much about the Mennonite colonies,
A little bit.
but like those, or the I can't remember what group of people it is. The group of people that they don't use cars, they don't have television, they don't have radio. Amish, yes.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you could, that's a way of kind of imagining yourself into what this might be like. Very simple life, communal, okay? So this is where the low part wouldn't fit in, because Madison kind of he really did count on people's self-interest. And in a way, counted on separation. We want to have many interests, and therefore many factions, which will keep any one of them from getting the upper hand. And this is the opposite of what Rousseau wants here. Now, I mentioned the Puritan morals of long ago, to the extent that they actually existed. They were kind of extreme in some cases, Massachusetts, It was, those people were really morally strict.
The witch burners?
Yeah, those people, yeah. They were superstitious. And yeah, they're the Scarlet Letter folks, right? Everybody was in agreement.
Rousseau would probably like that.
Well, that's the thing is, Rousseau is a strange character. He's contradictory because he himself would not fit into a community like that well. I'm sure that in his own heart of hearts, he was not a Genevan. But yet he appreciates the cohesion that comes in that kind of community. Literally, you censor yourself. I mean, we're gonna get into the discussion of what Rousseau admires about the Roman censorship and how he wants censorship to operate. But in a community like that, you try your best to be in full agreement. Go to church, do this, that, and the other thing. Read your Bible, but you don't want to stand out. And if you do stand out, you're going to receive, at the very least, people are going to look askance at you. That's the very least that's going to happen. They're going to look at you and go, "Oh, that's," and you're going to feel like you're on the outs, and then it gets worse from there. In America, we emphasize, and more have emphasized the freedom of the individual to be different, right? To have that freedom of speech and religion and so forth. And so in a pure democracy of Rousseau's liking, this would not be good. He also points out that as far as the existence of democracy being probable, he says no government is so prone to civil wars as democracy, because in reality, people will differ. We don't want them to, but in reality they do. He says, were there a people of gods, it would govern itself democratically. So perfect a government is not suited to men. So in reality, it's not likely, because you will get divisions. Okay. Does it surprise you that he steps away from the possibility of it actually coming into being so quickly?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Because the degree to which he kind of lives in his own little world of where these things could happen, he's done a pretty good job, I think, of recognizing that he's off in his own little world.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, other people have, stuck to democracy a little more firmly, I guess. They've tried to say, I guess Thomas More's wasn't really a democracy, but you can stick by your government.
Yeah.
And kind of push it, even though it's not perfect, but.
Right. He could have moved towards mixed government,
mm-hmm.
or a system of representation, which is like More. He has multiple layers of representation. He has kind of all three. And plus priestly rule as well. So he tried to imagine, how can we get people as communally involved as possible at every level and still have it work?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Rousseau does seem to be saying, well, it would be great, and this is my highest standard that I'm going to judge other governments by, but I'm going to admit it's not possible.
Well, even Plato stuck to the Republic, even though he really carried it through.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, well, but
Mm-hmm.
this is close we can get.
I feel like
Right.
he wouldn't have known states being democracies, how developed they would become and how much good could come out of them, I guess. So I feel like that's probably a large part of why, or how he would view that, if he was transported to the future and saw how democracy turned out,
he would be pleasantly surprised.
He may be maybe not pleasantly surprised, but he'd be a little bit surprised, be like, oh, I guess there is some good that can come out of democracy.
Right. Modified democracy, right.
Yeah.
There's stability.
Yeah.
That's a major good. And that's something that he wants. He wants stability. Citizenship, no. That's sideline. Simplicity, no, right? You do have the opportunity to practice citizenship in this country, which is, maybe a saving grace there. The people who want to be fully involved really can be very involved. But it does discourage that. So, but yeah, I mean, as far as now, not to get too off topic, but as far as how Marx thought about this, Marx actually wanted a materialistic, abundantly, wealthy kind of society to come out of communism. And it's kind of interesting to ask what Marx would think of our government. Now there you have a real irony, because if he could see how well off even the poor are relative to his own day, okay, he'd still be critical of the differences in class, but he'd be absolutely amazed and probably blown away by the amount of material abundance that capitalism has produced, as opposed to what he thought it would. Rousseau would be aghast at the amount of material abundance. In other words, the fact that we've been very successful economically, producing way more food than people would have ever imagined, making, housing and clothing and all of the things people need better and more abundantly than they ever imagined. Rousseau would say, well, this just corrupts people further. It diverts them.
I kind of wonder, because his whole thing was he didn't want, people to stand above each other in democracies. Well, I mean, if you have people that are more learned and that, they go to college and they become doctors and, they advance medicine, how would he view that then? Would he see advancing medical technology as a luxury at that point then, or?
Well, wouldn't he say that it's because of our own lavish ways that we had to advance medicine to begin with?
No, there is that, that we've sort of made ourselves unhealthy, and we lack that robust character early man, who in reality died at the age of 35, but but he has this ideal, So a lot of, he would probably say that. But, I just was going back over the first discourse, which I don't ask you guys to read, on the arts and sciences. And there he kind of makes me think that there is some arts and sciences that he would actually admit, as long as they actually attain something of real value, as opposed to the superfluities and luxuries that we have. Because he mentions, I think it's Bacon, Descartes, Newton, people like that, the great scientists, as being outside of his criticism. He says really? Yeah, he does. I haven't read it in a while, and I was kind of surprised. I sort of missed that before. It comes at the very end, after he's hammered the arts and sciences repeatedly. But at the very end, he says that. Did you do a paper on that?
No,
at some point?
Science,
okay, somebody did in that class.
That the conclusion of Rousseau was that he was pretty anti-science.
Well, and overall the thrust of his argument is anti-science, and that's why I was surprised to find this. It's just a couple of paragraphs, but he seems to separate the true great minds of science from all of the petty speculators that use it just to make money and create things that people don't need. And he says of the great ones, he says they don't need teachers and they don't need followers. So I don't know what to make of that, or how seriously to take that. I mean, obviously in the origins of inequality, it's just all bad. Every advancement that we've had, he doesn't make that maneuver. And I mean, what scholars do with that is they always say, okay, you take what the person says last rather than what he says first, as far as where, what he really thinks. But I just found it curious that there's this little peephole that he opens up there, that maybe not all science is bad.
Well, I could see him liking Bacon if he had read The New Atlantis and the Nova Organum.
Which he probably did.
Right, and so I mean that's kind of on his spooky lines of established society.
Right.
But as far as Newton, from reading this, especially having read this, I can't see why he would get behind Newton or think that it's valuable. Because Newton's critics were well, okay, now gravity makes an apple fall on your head. We know the apples fall. Whatever.
We don't really need that.
Right.
Yeah. Plus, it doesn't really answer anything because he doesn't know what it is.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much to make of that, but I wonder what Rousseau would think. I mean, in a way, it's a little unfair because we're so far advanced from what he could have possibly imagined. Maybe he would just be stunned. I don't know. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're almost ready to, we're getting cures to cancer. You know, I mean, this is really starting to be amazing. And
Mars.
yeah, right. We're going to colonize. They're creating 3D printers that can create tools and buildings in space and replicate themselves. It's science fiction time. It really is. So, yeah. But yeah, I think Becca's spot on as far as what we could predict is that he would say, you know, you need this because you've ruined your health. Plus, the more that these people, you know, separate themselves from the rest of humanity and their knowledge and their income and so forth, the more inequality there is. And so we live a longer life. To do what? To do what with? You know, he's very romantic about this kind of thing. This is why another thing he does in the first discourse is he kind of romanticizes warfare and the heroic warrior figure who is somebody who's willing to die for his country and may live a very short life, but gets all of this glory and honor and so forth. And so I don't know if length of life would matter that much to Rousseau. It would be the value of life, you know, what life is about.
Well, the whole glory thing, that almost seems like that would be very against his...
Yeah, it's inegalitarian.
Yeah,
right? Yeah, I agree.
Well, it's individual too. It's my glory.
But he admires Sparta, you know. The Spartan warriors, they were all ready to die for their country. Glory was how many people they could kill. And there's something very manly and strong about that he admires. But it does contradict, because you're right, honor separates people, and it's about competition. And you're not going to have equal valor. That was part of the motivation for making the attempt.
Well, even that, and the fact that people are going to have different physical abilities. Not everybody's going to be able to, you know, fight for as long or, you know, do as much. And that just, obviously more people are going to gain more valor because they're either stronger or faster or just better physically than another person.
All sorts of things come into play there. So
despite what the school teachers want to say, everyone's not a winner.
Yeah, right. It's another myth. I mean, this is something that I'm trying to bust through, and it's very, very difficult. I'm going to have to write a book and just lay it out and shock people. But in a democracy, we still have inequality, and it's not just the typical inequality of. I mean, everybody recognizes we have income inequality, but we still have physical inequality. We have intellectual inequality. We have temperament inequality. You know, there's all kinds of inequalities that do create. Both good and bad competition, and create what I want to argue obligation, which our society doesn't want to recognize. We want to say men and women are absolutely equal, okay, even though physically they're not, and maybe even temperament. You know, there's an argument to be made there, but definitely physically. But because we want to abstractly argue for full equality, men are being encouraged to not feel any obligation towards women, as far as, you know, protection in situations where they actually need it. People who are smarter than others really should. It's dangerous to encourage them not to have a sense of obligation to their fellow man. But if you keep hammering in absolute equality, it gives them the freedom to just take advantage. And that's what happens. But this is going to be a tough sell, because people do not want to hear that there's any natural inequality in a democracy.
It just feels to recognize that it's not a bad thing. Like, you may be stronger than me, and I may be smarter than you, but it's not a bad thing. You know, we're just good at different things.
It's kind of what makes us all like individual people.
Yes.
We're not just
not automatons.
We're not, you know, sexually reproduced cells in a body that are exactly the same.
Right. It does make life more interesting. And unfortunately, it makes people uncomfortable too, you know, when it comes right down to it. So, but that's a great argument.
I find that really odd that people are just so uptight that, oh, they're different. Yeah, they're different. You've probably got stuff that you do better than they do.
Well, and the idea that they might have that you might have an obligation to them or they might have an obligation to you because you're not exactly the same with the same skill set and the same opportunities, just bothers people. It's partly that, if you say you've got a moral obligation, it's a binding thing, and then you have to worry about, well, how do I do exactly what I want and have this obligation at the same time? So yeah, but I think that's the next book I'm going to write. I'm certainly well prepared, having written 3 books. The one I'm working on now will be my 3rd on this topic that's got a scholarly focus, and that's all been in preparation for doing a more popular book on the subject. So I'm excited. Probably won't get any scholarly admiration for it, but I don't really care. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about aristocracy. Ideally, aristocracy is elective, Rousseau says, where people elect the wisest. Because in the old-fashioned sense, in the original sense, aristocracy meant rule by the few who are wise. He says it is the best and most natural order for the wisest to govern the multitude. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting statement there. The most natural order to come out is the wisest to govern the multitude. When you think about it, in early, in tribal societies, at least in an ideal sense, isn't it the elders, oftentimes, the people who are the oldest, usually the oldest males, and they kind of form the council, and then you've got the top male who's been around the longest and has the most experience, been the best warrior and so forth, and this is how they're governed. And sometimes the wisest women are involved in some way as well. They are the old ones. One of the criticisms of our society is that we tend to go in the opposite direction, like Machiavelli did, and say youth brings, vigor, and there's a certain decisiveness and vitality there that's missing, and in the older people who are more conservative, timid, kind of hidebound and so forth. But traditionally speaking, prior to modern political thought, generally speaking, most people naturally gravitated towards the people with the most experience. Those were the ones that, should rule. So this is probably what he means by the most natural order here, is if, people look to those who've been around the longest and seem to know the most. So he says, when it is certain that they will govern for its profit and not their own. So this is part of the ideal, is these few who are naturally wiser because they've been around longer or just because, have in their minds only the good of the people, the multitude. So, do we come closer to our system here? I have these pictures of Bushes and Kennedys and Roosevelts, and I guess we could add Clintons now. Or just in general, when we elect people, and this is a big country, so I think that we could Rousseau see an aristocracy in Congress?
Definitely.
Okay.
Generally speaking, this is more along the familial lines and not, who's the wisest lines. Most people that are in, in Congress or, have been presidents, they've had family members that have been in, the same or similar positions for generations. And it's like, if your family's in it, you're pretty much going to be involved in some way.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. We talk about no monarchy and no, but we have those the American family names that are basically like American royalty. I think as far as electing the wisest in our Congress right now, no. But if we had to, if you had to become a member of Congress the same way you have to become a Rhodes Scholar, you'd probably be a lot better off.
Mm-hmm. It's maybe blunted by the fact that the very wisest don't run.
Right.
But you could argue that the people who do run, in as much as they come from this type of background, at least have they have more knowledge about government and economics and foreign policy than the average person because they've been more or less educated and groomed. So it may not be, but the problem for Rousseau would definitely be that they don't run for the right reason necessarily, right? And people don't choose them necessarily for the right reason either. We don't go into the voting booth saying, which is the wisest, right? What do we usually think about when we go into the voting booth and make our choices? What are we wanting?
I think we're the wrong people to ask that.
Okay, this is your selective group here. Do you think about, what do most people think about? Let's put it
most
that
people
way.
are going to think about which of these people is going to push the agenda that I want them to push,
Or who's the better looking?
or who's the better
Or
looking,
who do I know?
who
Yeah.
has the better morals, you
Yeah.
know, who's
Okay.
who's the greater churchgoer, who's the one that's more the family man, who's the one that has the image that I prefer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those issues can come into play when, and the reason why candidates look for moral failings in their opponents is because we don't want to elect somebody who's a philanderer, who's some guy in Kansas got shot down because he'd appeared early in his younger days in some Hollywood B movie where he did drugs in the movie or something like that. I can't remember the exact scenario, but he was one of our Kansas pals who was running for the Kansas legislature. And that got dug up, and then there were pictures of him in the movie, and want to elect a silly, guy who went off to California.
We elected Reagan as president, just saying.
Yeah, but
Arnold Schwarzenegger's the governor of California. I mean,
I was going to say Reagan played these wholesome roles. I'm not sure though. I haven't watched all of his movies, but and Schwarzenegger, he didn't really play wholesome roles. He
was
killed
a killer and
killed hundreds and thousands of people.
But I would pull up the Clinton argument to that. Like, are you concerned about, maybe I have a zipper problem, or I can do some really good foreign policy, and I can really advance our nation's interests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is what people came around to with the Clintons. Is we prefer to not deal with this, but we separated the political skill from the personal in that case. They were able to accomplish that separation. He was already in the White House when it happened. In a campaign, it's difficult to do. And it takes political skill, real political skill to do that. And it also depends on where you're at. It seems like in Kansas, those issues of moral rectitude are a big deal, and they come with those signs that you mentioned and so forth. And people can be, among the dangers there is people can be manipulated by somebody who's good at appearing to be those things, right? We make our decisions on the basis of either is this person going to advance the agenda that I like best, and or does this person have the right image? Do I feel good about whatever that means? Do I feel good about this person? Or maybe it's a woman, or it's a man, or it's a member of my racial or ethnic category as well. And those are all reasons, people.
Right down the party lines.
Yeah. That's what I've done in the past. It's not political scientists want to say it's a stupid way to vote, but I actually think it might be pretty well informed, because what can you really know about candidates?
Right.
What can you really know
well,
about
since
what
they don't
they're
really
doing?
tell you anything when they're campaigning.
No, they don't tell you anything. And what they do say oftentimes contradicts what they end up doing. So about the only predictive thing is their party membership, and that only goes so far, but it's at least something.
Well, and when you get down to like the sheriff, or like I went and voted for all the appellate judges, and like my parents are lawyers, so I literally took a list and I was like, okay.
You knew. Most of us don't know who these people are. That makes it really tough. We judges get reelected simply by default because nobody knows anything about them, unless you've run up against the law, then, but how likely are you to vote then? Well, anyway, so yes, but maybe we would come closer to be seen as an aristocracy by Rousseau, but not an ideal aristocracy where the wisest are in charge and they govern for the sake of the common good. Okay, because the system is just not set up to encourage that. Then he moves on to monarchy. He says monarchy is the most active and vigorous government of all. And that is no doubt because one person is in charge, right? So you don't have to deliberate, you don't have to have committees, you don't have to, achieve consensus. All the consensus is already there. But, whereas aristocracy has some intermediaries, he says, which is, what we might say is bureaucracy, people that carry out the government's policies, the monarchy has to have even more. He says in order for a monarchy to function, there has to be grandees, nobles, advisors around this individual. And he says many of them are attempting to take advantage and are not. And so they create this divisive force between the monarch and the people. Okay. He looks at two different types of monarchy, the elected and the hereditary, and both of them have problems. He says of the elected monarch, as soon as the previous monarch dies, you have this all-out fight, which can turn into a civil war over who will be elected next. And a hereditary monarchy has problems, and this is something Hobbes didn't want to admit, but the problem there is you never know who you're going to get next.
Right.
It could be somebody of very high quality, or it could be somebody of very poor quality. It could even be a child, which Hobbes kind of tries to deal with, but not successfully. What do you do in the meantime? And so it's got its flaws. Ideally, again, what you would want is a monarch with all of the good qualities, where the will of the people is the same as the will of the monarch. Okay, and who rules in wisdom and not for his own benefit. But history shows us that for the most part that doesn't happen. Okay?
Game of Thrones.
I'm on, let's see now, I'm on 5 now, so I'm way behind you. But yeah, if people just watch that, they would quickly get the message. That kid got killed right away. Stuff like that, I'm sure, happened all the time in these monarchies. People would just have an accident and then they'd no longer be a problem in the way of anybody else. Okay, a little bit about mixed government. Again, he says this is the farthest from the ideal situation. It's only needed when government needs to be weakened because it is not in the hands of people who think of the common good. So in a way, it is the Band-Aid, what we would consider to be, in this country, the solution to all of the human condition, mixed government. It becomes the Band-Aid, the thing that you do in a way, it's two sides of the same coin. But Rousseau sees it as a major step down, and we have to. It creates more stability, but it's a mixture of all three. So you would have your representation by the people in some sort of parliament. You'd have the monarch. You'd have the aristocrats. Okay, which is what they were moving towards. Okay, so again, one more comparison. He says not all governments are suited to all countries, and he makes this point about about taxes. Well, we can deal with this when we come back next time, first off, but he talks about the money, which I think is an interesting one. In what type of government is the money best spent and used to keep people happier? Okay. So, I'll see you Wednesday.
I'm not too far from it. I just got to season 2, episode 1.
Okay.
So, I guess
You're going to get farther and farther away from me.